So welcome to part 3 in the Killer Food Plot segment, talking today about annuals versus perennials, food plot placement, spring versus fall food plots, and the different seed selection choices that you'll have to make in those two particular times of the year that we plant. So one of the questions we get asked quite often is, should I be planting perennials or should I be planting annuals? The answer is both. Both of them are critical at different times of the year. They're very important to have a good high protein food source in early spring and summer. However, the expectation that you're going to plant in the early spring and have immediate good quality protein producing forage is difficult. So it takes a little more planning when you're looking at putting in a perennial. Annuals, they produce very, very quickly. They produce within 30 to 45 days from seed to full maturity. So that gives you an immediate food source, high energy food source that deer need going into the fall and winter. Perennial food sources, which are high in protein, are very important also in the fall. So that high stress time of the year requires a good staple protein food source. Now we are looking at about a 20% to 80% ratio between 20% perennials and 80% annuals. Those two food sources that are available both in spring and summer and early fall are critical to bridge the gap between Mother Nature creating and growing the new vegetation in early spring and fall and the lack thereof after everything is either eaten, squirreled away in a hole, or buried in the ground by all of wildlife getting prepared for the winter. It's very important to supplement those times of the year with valuable high protein and high carbohydrates or sugar producing food sources for your whitetails. In that high competition situation, there's only so much of Mother Nature to go around. By supplementing, not replacing, but supplementing at those critical times of the year, you can make a dramatic impact on the quality and the health of your whitetails going into that most critical time of the year. Without these in place, there is higher mortality in your bucks and your does throughout the hard winter months. There is more of a larger impact on the actual fawn production in early spring. Without the proper nutrition, does will abort their fawns. They will maybe have less fawn production. They will certainly see a huge impact in a reduction in their lactation cycle, the production of the invaluable milk. That milk production is key in delivering critical vitamins, minerals, and nutrients to those newborn fawns. In fact, the milk contains the bacteria that kickstarts the digestive system in your buck and doe fawns. So if you want to make an impact, a huge impact on next year and the years ahead in your deer population and the quality of the deer manifested off your property, you want that big buck, it starts with the does. It starts with taking care of the deer you have today so that they can prepare the way and provide the vitamins, minerals, proteins, and nutrients to that next generation of buck and doe fawns, and you can achieve your goals. So in determining a perennial versus an annual, there are some things to consider. On perennials, you need to determine the soil. What's the quality of the soil? How much soil correction is required in order to be ready to grow that perennial? We want to look at sunlight. We want to look at access. So perennials, depending on this particular species, may require almost full sun to half-day sun, or something that's half-day sun to the lower part in clover so they don't burn up. Chicory, alfalfa, they're going to want all-day sun whenever possible. When you're dealing with a perennial, it's not plant it and forget it. There is maintenance required on perennials. Whether it's clover, chicory, or alfalfa, you're going to have to fertilize them 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, depending on the size of your food plot, the location, and the growth at which you're realizing in those food plot sources. Again, mowing. Mowing is absolutely critical because you want to break the flowering cycle, for instance, in your alfalfas and your clovers. In chicory, yeah, it's probably one of the least maintenance required perennials. So if you don't have access to a mower, or you're not going to be able to frequent your farm often enough to maintain, maybe chicory is your choice. Regardless of which perennial you choose, they are going to require soil testing to amend the soil to a 6.5 to 7.5 range in order to be successful in producing the maximum amount of tonnage. They are going to require fertilization somewhere between 3 to 4 times a year, spring, midsummer, late summer, and early fall. They are also going to require mowing of those food sources. So you have to think about accessibility to be able to get in. It can be pulled behind a mower. It could be a weed whacker. It could be an actual mowing deck. It just depends on the size of the food plot and the accessibility you have with the equipment. Those are key factors in determining, can I and should I plant a perennial? Perennials should be about 20 to 30% of your food plot plan in order to provide vital nutrients early spring and summer, and then again in early fall and late fall if possible to help with recovery post-rut. So my favorite perennials that I like to recommend to you would be a clover chicory blend. Why is that? They produce high protein content. They're fairly easy to grow. The combination of those two things, our res clover and our chicory, do very well. They're a nice partnership. The chicory puts down a 14 to 16 inch taproot, about the size of my pinky. So it's extremely drought tolerant for those of you that live in an area where you don't see a lot of moisture in a year or it's very sporadic. The clover then, as a complement to the chicory, produces nitrogen. So it helps to feed the chicory, keeping your fertilizing bill down, while producing highly digestible, extremely important mid-30s in the protein scale for your whitetail deer. Chicory produces 40+% in our KFP chicory. So very high green protein producing green forage that is available to your deer at those critical times of the year, helps to bridge the gap where Mother Nature falls short and helps you to get up and achieve those goals that you have on your individual farm or property. So about 80% of your food plot plan should contain annual plantings. Why is that? They produce quickly. They produce a lot of groceries, which are critical at those particular times of the year you're going to be planting the annuals. You need stuff to come up quickly, produce high quality forage while Mother Nature is taking her sweet time in the spring producing natural food, but also bridging that gap, providing higher quality forage that's meeting the needs of your whitetails that would otherwise go unfulfilled. In the fall, annuals play an even bigger part because now we're going into that time of the year where every animal known to the wilderness have consumed the food sources. Everything is dying off, going into that dormant stage. No food production is coming off the ends of the trees. It's not in the ground in the vegetation. Annual food plots serve a huge purpose at this time of the year to provide high energy, carbohydrate producing, and some proteins that are critical at that time of the year. Well, an example of an annual would be soybeans, for instance. Planted mid to late summer can produce protein for early season. There are cereal grains, very, very important. Cereal grains mimic natural browse that are no longer available going into the late fall and winter, and they are extremely important for boosting or encouraging the digestive cycle within the gut or the stomach of your whitetail deer. Something that people don't think much about. The other key to daily life for your whitetail is having the energy they need to get up from one point and go to another point. They need water, they need cover, and they need that food. Their cycle of moving in order to keep their body warm and keep their system functioning properly is to get up and move and go to different food sources. What are some examples of annuals? Your turnips, your radishes, your rape. Those are probably three of the big ones that most of you are familiar with, or if you're just new to food plotting, that you're going to see in a multitude of different blends of food plot seed. Why are they important? They're usually easily digested. Now brassicas, which are turnips, rape, radishes, in that field, kale, those are all examples of the brassica family. The critical part of these food is the carbohydrates. They're very bitter and full of starch in the early season. So the deer tend to favor other food sources, but once the weather changes and it gets cooler, some of these brassica blends become very sweet, whereas the starch turns into sugars, and it provides them with that daily kicker that, you and I would go grab a Mountain Dew or some high caffeine content. That's what the whitetail are getting in a natural form from these green forage food selections that you have within your food plot. As the season progresses and the cold really sets in and we hit frost, other seeds within that variety are triggered, and they turn from that bitter starch into sweet, sugary plants. Many of you that have planted food plots before have seen your brassica plots go from really nice, thick vegetation right down to like a well-groomed green on your golf course. That's because the deer need those daily carbs or those energy sources in order to maintain their body during rut or during post-rut. When we start getting into the colder, tough weather, that burns a lot of calories. One thing to consider when you are planning your annual food plots is try to keep them within 50 to 75 yards of a bedding area or an area where the deer stage and spend a great deal of time during the night hours or in the cooler times of the day. That will help minimize the stress, providing that daily energy, and again, help your deer weather the late season and get back into the spring weather healthier, capable of producing the much needed nutrients for the unborn fawns, and be able to start that next spring in the best possible condition. So, in closing, 3 of my favorite choices for perennials are clover, chicory, and alfalfa. They are the most highly digestible. They're the most available protein, green forage protein food sources available for your deer. Some of my favorites in the annual category are turnips, radishes, love my radishes, and also sugar beets. High tonnage producing, very available green, high energy starch that turns to sugar. Remember, the can of Mountain Dew, they need that energy. Very high carbohydrate, tonnage producing annual food sources. So to wrap it up, you need about 20 to 30% perennials. You need 70 to 80% annuals. That combination of groceries is going to help you get it done.